Force feedback is completely reshaping the flight simulator landscape. For decades we've been stuck with static joysticks that rely on mechanic springs to pull the stick back to the center, completely detached from what the plane is actually doing. But direct drive hardware like the Moza AB6 and AB9 works differently. Instead of relying on artificial center springs, Moza maps true physics-driven aerodynamics straight to your hands via the Moza Cockpit software. The absolute secret to a perfect experience is knowing how to configure the software differently depending on what you fly. A lightweight Cessna 172 requires a completely different force profile than a heavy, fly-by-wire Airbus A320. Today we're going to deep dive into every setting using real general aviation and airliner guardrails so you can dial in your software settings to unlock absolute realism in Microsoft Flight Simulator. To access the settings, you simply press the device which you want to configure, in this case the AB6, which opens up this window with the basics view. Before we look at movement filters, we must talk about roll power management using the top two sliders, because airliners and lightweight general aviation planes handle baseline force ceilings completely differently. First, maximum torque output, which sets the absolute physical capability of the base motor. As a strict baseline rule, always leave this at 100%. This ensures your hardware retains its full dynamic range and can deliver instantaneous, crisp physical fidelity when the physics engine requests it. Second, we've got the overall force feedback intensity. This controls how much of that torque is regularly sent to your hands during standard flight maneuvers to keep the signals from clipping. Here is your first major configuration guardrail. For a Cessna 172, lower this slider to 40 to 50%. A real Cessna has a relatively light unassisted mechanical yoke. If you leave this too high, the stick will feel unrealistically heavy, like you're wrestling an iron bar just to make a standard rate turn. For an Airbus A320, move this up to 70-80% or maybe even higher. Because the Airbus uses a compact side stick, commercial flight decks utilize heavy, specific centered mechanisms that give the controls a very rigid, highly authoritative baseline presence. Now that our power limits are locked in, let's establish our setup guardrails for the stabilization sliders below. We start with the damper, which adds physical resistance on the speed of your control inputs. If you yank the stick quickly, it fights back. If you move it slowly, it's completely fluid. For the Cessna 172, keep this low between 50 to 30%. A 172 stick is light and responsive, too much damping makes it feel sluggish. For the Airbus A320, crank this up to 40 to 60%. This stops the stick from feeling springy and prevents you from over-controlling and oscillating past your target pitch on short final. Then we've got the inertia, which simulates the massively physically bulk of control surfaces resisting a change in movement. For the Cessna 172, drop this slider to 0 to 10% because small GA planes have tiny control surfaces with almost zero perceived mechanical inertia. For the Airbus A320, bump this up to 25 to 40% to recreate the heavy feeling of large engineering surfaces resisting fast, erratic hand inputs. Then we've got the friction. The friction adds a constant, uniform mechanical drag across the entire range of movement, completely independent of speed. For Cessna 172, keep it minimal at 5 to 10% so you can make tiny, fluid microcorrections during the flare. For Airbus A320, set it to 15 to 25% to give the side stick a premium hydraulic tightness that absorbs subtle hand tremors. So these were the basic settings, but if you want to make it even more complex or even you want to have more control of how the joystick reacts, then you will need to go to the expert settings where you will find more options, but you can also see some of them are similar compared to the basic settings. We start with the centering piece. The centering piece contains a lot of options, including the, axis settings as well as the adaptive centering compensation. If you will enable it, you will configure your essential safety guardrail. In direct drive flight bases, if you release the stick while flying through severe weather, the high-speed telemetry can cause the hardware to viciously smash back and forth, creating a runaway feedback loop. Turning this feature on acts as a protective shield, instantly calming the hardware down the microsecond you let go, protecting your desktop mount whether you are cruising in a Cessna or managing a heavy airliner. If we scroll to the top, we can see the axis settings. You can uncheck the link X and I to isolate your physical axis. For Cessna 172, the elevator naturally feels heavier due to the slipstream engine air pushing directly against it compared to the lightweight ailerons. You can use these independent 2D map boxes to make your pitch damping curve noticeably heavier while leaving your roll axis perfectly light and free for false banking. In the center you will see the physics model settings, which is by default set to simplified, which contains exactly the same settings as the base settings, so for now I will skip them. Of course you always have the option to switch to advanced, and this will allow you to configure it depending on the axis, right? You can configure the maximum torque output limit. You can set the pitch axis, the roll axis, but also the sensitivity of the force feedback. And then based on the pitch axis, the roll axis and the overall feedback, as well as the spring strength, which we also, by the way, didn't discuss in the previous one. Besides that, you will see that most of the options are there, and you can either, I would say, combine the axis or decouple the axis. So that's really, I would say, if you really want to go deep into it, I haven't found, I would say, a reason to go into this, so I leave this one to simplify it. Which brings us to the next pane, which is the trim following setting. So the trim following setting is pretty interesting. In a Cessna 172, guardrail focuses on manual trim. A real Cessna yoke physically stays where you put it, but the aerodynamic pressure against it changes. To simulate this correctly, turn trim following on. And the turn trim following on can be found on the bottom. Here you can simply enable it by selecting the option, and based on that you will get, say, options to change these settings, right? You can say the x-axis physically stick follow rate to 10 or even higher, maximum 20. I would start with 10 and then I would say adjust where needed. This is really of course up to you because it sometimes also is a personal preference. What happens if you turn this on? As you roll your physical trim wheel, the physical center point of your Moza stick will slowly migrate forward or backward, removing the physical pressure against your hand and matching the aerodynamic state of the aircraft. If you're flying an Airbus A320, then the guardrail is completely different. An Airbus side stick never moves physically when you're trimming. The fly-by-wire computers handle it entirely in the background. For airliners like this, change your axis follow mode to no follow. Simply uncheck it, because we just enabled it. The stick must stay perfectly dead centered no matter what the auto trim system is executing. Below that we see the autopilot following. If you turn on autopilot in a Boeing or a Cessna, the controls move by themselves. This is what you can do with the autopilot following mode. You can open it and then you can see, okay, hey, what are the things which are changing? And here you can also see that there are a crazy amount of settings which you can configure. The first option makes sense, right? If you enable this option, it will simply lock the stick's position and axis output in the center. Then we've got a lot of roll follow options, right? The roll follow, the pitch follow skill. These options which amplifies or reduce the movement follow of the in-game telemetry output position. So simply, I would say, kind of, enforce it. Then we've got the breakout strength for both the roll, the pitch, but also the roll breakout force and the force range for the pitch. These are separate settings, right? For roll breakout force strength, we've got this option. And for pitch breakout force strength, we've got this option. Then we've got the breakout force range. So the range where you need to apply, that additional force, which is both set to 50%. And then we've got the follow rate, and that adjusts the rate at which the control stick yoke moves to the specified position according to the commands. And the pitch follow adjusts the rate of which the control stick yoke moves to the specified position according to the commands. So different options to control both the pitch as well as the roll. And depending on your preference, you might want to tweak this. They didn't change much, to be honest. When I switch them off and when I, for example, enable the autopilot in my Cessna, this joystick simply moves around and it ran really smooth. No weird things happened. If you enable these options, you can also say enable the options here, right? Or you can see which options are enabled. This will give you the status. So the status, if we enable it like this, then I would expect that the option to be enabled here. But I'm say it's really unclear from the manual because there's literally no manual on what this option does. But maybe someone knows. If you know it, then leave a comment in the comment box. Then we've got the access follow mode, which we didn't discuss yet. This is identical to the former FFB compatible mode. Previous software there was the FFB compatible mode, so during trimming the output access values match the exact physical stick or yoke position. No follow is identically to the former traditional mode, which was there in, I would say, previous version of the software. During trimming the output access values are kept 0, so that the game does not read on one input, and then you've got custom where you can customize the values by using these sliders. By default set to no follow. That's also, I'd say, depends on your profile. If you, for example, change to a different profile, you can do that. Let me say, okay, hey, I want to move to a different profile, which you can do over here. And then, for example, select this one and then go back. You will see that it's also set to no follow. But in some cases you might want to change it. And that's also the nice thing, right? You can configure this and make sure that you then save it to your profile, and then it will be automatically applied to your profile. So I can say unload profile sets, and then I can say, hey, I want to create a new profile depending on this, and then simply would say use that option. So this is how you can benefit from multiple configurations for multiple aircrafts using this nice tool, the Moza Cockpit software. Because Moza builds hardware with industrial-grade modular components, your customization options go way beyond your axis forces like we just discussed. If you want to calibrate your auxiliary sliders, you can even do that, depending of course on what you want, because you can simply modify them over here. You can change the lightning on the throttle plane settings, and you can also make changes to the pattern like step or strength. You can enable telemetry options, and then of course you can calibrate them. In my previous video I showed you how to calibrate it, but I would say have a look at it if you're having issues with it. Now we looked at this, let's continue with of course the force feedback, because that's a unique functionality from this joystick which really adds value. I did try it now for several weeks and I'm really impressed by this. These are the settings which you can make, which are divided in effects, deceleration effect, telemetry and force feedback settings. You can see in this case telemetry data is pending because hey, flight simulator is not running, so it likely doesn't give much things back. But you can also change a lot of settings here. First of all, let's start with the force feedback settings. This will normally show you the data, as well as the telemetry tab, which it receives from the simulator. So the simulator needs to run, and then when you see it, it will show some data. So let me start Flight Simulator so we can have a look at this. So I jumped to Flight Simulator in the Cessna. So let's see how the, would say, telemetry data is being received now in the Moza Cockpit. And here you see what it does. So you can see in this case that the class name is propeller aircraft from the C172 SP G1000 passenger. You can see the indicated airspeed, the altitude, the angle of attack, the vertical speed, the flaps, the gears, the pitch trim. All the telemetry is received, and you can see that the telemetry based force feedback effects, the propeller vibration is, I would say, added. And if you would be here in the same room as I am, I can feel that, I would say, movement. Now, let's assume that we're gonna take off. So let me remove the parking brakes and let's hit full throttle. Here we go. Then I'm gonna do a tricky thing because I'm gonna, I would say, try to fly, but also switch back to the Moza software. And here you see that the data changes live, which is super nice. Now, let's see if we go airborne. So a little bit longer. Oh, here we go. So we're now airborne. And as you can see, let's say the propeller vibration is still active. But let me do one thing. Let me do the flaps up. You can see the flap motion is also activating. So this is how it works. This is how the Moza Cockpit software receives telemetry data from Flight Simulator 2024 and is using it to, let's say, kind of give the force feedback information, how it should react and how the servo motor should work. And using this, I would say, setup, which I recreated based on the Moza one, I can already tell you this really moves slowly. Now let's do the same thing for the Airbus. As you can see, we're flying in the Airbus, so if I would now move to the cockpit software, you will see that it already gets the data, it already knows the aircraft, and based on that it activated the jet engine vibration. Of course, I switched to the A320 profile, and by the way, this one simply means the auto preset is being disabled. And changing all the settings here. So for example, if I want to enable AOA reverse effect, I can enable it, but then I need to make sure that I click that save option because I want to retain that setting, of course. Now we looked at how this works, let's look at how we can customize the configuration. What you will see here is that you can apply filters, you can enter keywords, and the filter is connected to the preset which you have. So if I now switch to, for example, a Cessna 172, right, let me search for it, 172, and then switch to it, simply double click, then go back to the setting. You will see that different options are selected because now it says filter propeller 16. So this is tightly connected to, I would say, the profile setting. Based on that, you can enable or disable, and you can change settings for every option. So you can adjust the G-force, you can adjust the stick shaker, but also look at the wing main wing, the stall buffet, which is enabled, and the transition buffet. The stall buffet, which is enabled with these settings. And here you can say, hey, I want to say increase the strength. I want to have a buffet, just a vibration, right? How much does it vibrate? And you can also change the buffet onset AOA, angle of attack in degree, as well as the stall AOA. And this is simply based on the telemetry it receives from the simulator. You can see that depending on the aircraft, you will have, let's say, options enabled and disabled, right? If I go to the flaps, I can feel the flap motion, which is simply moving the flaps. I've got the gears. In this case, the nose wheel shimmy is not selected. The gear buffet is not selected. Also, these options are all, say, not selected. If I now go to the propellers, then of course I will have some settings enabled. At least I would assume. Yes, here we go. We can change how, say, hard the force feedback will work and how much you feel from the propeller when selecting this option. If I now go to the A320, so back to the A320, here we go. And then look at these settings. You will see that first of all is a jet engine. You can see that this is enabled, but the afterburner is also enabled. This looks to be like a little bit an error because, well, it will be the first A320 with an afterburner. So you can disable it and then simply make sure that you save the profile. Here it also says that if you made changes, it's unsaved, so be aware of that and that you need to click the arrow and then say save to make, say, change to the profile. The same thing is also applicable to all the other settings. So look at them and then decide, okay, hey, which ones do I want to enable and which one do I want to leave disabled? For example, ground vibration is disabled. You might want to enable it if you want to make it more realistic. The flaps is enabled. If we look at the G-force, there's nothing. If we look at stick shaker, also nothing. And if we look at the deceleration effect, also nothing. So you've got all the controls in your hands to decide what to do. And if you select one of the options, you can simply enable these options, which allow you to, say, customize your configuration for Flight Simulator 2020 as well as 2024 with the Moza Cockpit software. Now, if you thought that we discussed everything, well, no, we're not there yet because we still have some tabs which we need to select. To tie the entire setup together, we need to move to the axis travels. And the axis travels contain the, I would say, axis, right? The x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. That's for the base, but don't forget that you also have the stick itself, which you can configure. So how can you use these axes? Well, if you think about the Cessna, you want a gentle progressive S-curve for maximum precision around center during gusty crosswind landings. So you want to change the setting lightly to maybe this setting and then apply to both the X and the Y axis. If you look for an Airbus, a perfectly linear curve works best to mirror the direct logic of modern fly-by-wire flight control computers. So that simply is this line, which is the default one. If you want to change this, you can simply do it by, I would say, adjusting these buttons. And in addition to that, you can also select to invert the axis, as well as change the axis positive travel limit and a negative time limit. This is, I would say, if you adjust this, right, the larger the value, the greater the range of motion. When the axis movement reaches the limit, the motor will generate a stronger counter torque. The force of the limit feedback will not weaken due to a reduction in the maximum output torque limit. Option. So this affects the, I would say, force feedback, but it simply, I would say, makes it harder, right? So if you're making a very, say, strong move, it will push you a little bit more back, but that's why you have force feedback. Now we discussed everything. There's of course one important thing which we didn't discuss yet. That's the profiles. I already talked about the profiles a lot, but I didn't tell you what you can do with it. With these profiles, you can configure all these settings and then create them for specific aircrafts. You will always find them in this section, and what you will see is if you click one of the options, you can use a lot of things. By default, if you create a new profile by using the new preset option, it will ask you for which device you want to configure the profile, and then after that you can specify a name. So for example, I can say AB6 A320, and then I can select the game, in this case Flight Simulator 2024. I can select the vehicle, and this is the list of default aircrafts in Flight Simulator 2024, depending on the version you have bought. You can see it's a pretty long list. And the reason why you want to use this is because, for example, let's assume that this is the A320, right? Let's find it. You can see the list is not alphabetically ordered, which I'll say, well, it is partially alphabetic ordered, so you can scroll, but you can also search for it. So if you search here for A320, I can, for example, select the Phoenix A32NX, and then I can enable this option. If I enable this option, it allows me to do auto preset matching, which means if I load up this aircraft, it will automatically load this, I would say, profile for me. So I directly have the correct settings when I start with my Airbus A320 from Phoenix on the runway. If I then move to a Cessna, it will move to the Cessna. But there are a few things which you need to keep in mind. In some cases, so let me hit cancel here, you might want to create a profile which is applicable to multiple aircrafts. So if I select AB6 Force Feedback and then select this game Flight Simulator 2024, you can see that the piston propeller does have the AB6 tag, it has the Flight Simulator 2024 tag, but it doesn't have any specific aircraft tag. The reason why this is the case is because I don't want this profile to be automatically applied. Well, I want it to be applied automatically, but currently there's a limitation that you can only select one aircraft for a profile. So if you create a profile which is applicable to multiple aircraft, then unfortunately you can't use the auto switch method, because I'd say this one, how should it know that you're flying a piston aircraft? It doesn't know. So that's, I'd say, kind of a limitation, but luckily enough, you can hit the Alt and the Tab key and then simply double click it. And then it says, okay, hey, I loaded the profile, and then it's good to go. And then you've got those right settings, in this case, for the piston propeller aircrafts in Flight Simulator 2020 or 2024. Well, in this case, 2024. Now some last tips. Let me remove this filter. As you can see, the list is extremely long. But there are some nice options in the settings menu where you can say, hey, I only want to show presets So if I enable the option, you only see 42 profiles. Well, if I disable it, it will show you more, right? And 96 in total. But you can benefit from the profiles which they created, the Moza people, I mean, because there's an M from Moza, and these are the ones which are, I'd say, specifically created. There are some of, say, force feedback modes over here, which I tried to add also here, but I didn't find out why it doesn't show up, even though the force feedback, would say, settings are configured. But you can use them as kind of a template and then create your own one for the AB6. So if I now choose my AB6 device, right, by selecting this option and then go to Flight Simulator 2024, all these 3 profiles have been recreated based on the profiles which Moza delivers out of the box for their solution. So really nice. So once you move past generic spring joysticks and configure true aircraft-specific aerodynamic physics, flight simulation transitions into an entirely new experience. Knowing these guardrails allows you to jump between general aviation and heavy airliners while maintaining flawlessly physical immersion. Are you happy how your force feedback setting feels right now? Do you want me to share my exact profiles for the Cessna or the Airbus? Let me know in the comment box below. If this deep dive masterclass helped you, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more advanced flight sim hardware content, as well as, of course, different types of videos. Thanks for watching and hope to see you back next time.